Why do you break your diet the day before you succeed? Why put off the most important project until the last night? Why spend money you don't have on things you don't need? You consider yourself a rational being, yet you systematically act against your own interests. Recognize yourself in at least one of these examples? This isn't a weakness of character. It's the result of a powerful yet hidden system within your psyche. To grasp the scale of its influence in the 20th century, Sigmund Freud was quoted 3 times more often than Charles Darwin. What if this enemy isn't just one, but 3 forces waging a constant war inside your head? And what if understanding the rules of this war gives you the key to controlling your life? First, 2 paradoxes that seem unsolvable. The first, why do the most moral people, those who strive for perfection, often suffer from the most agonizing guilt, while those who care less about rules often sleep soundly? We'll find the answer to this in section 3. And the second question, what makes us commit ridiculous slips of the tongue that can ruin important negotiations or damage relationships at the very moment we are trying hardest to control everything? We will reveal this secret in section 7. These paradoxes are not coincidences. They are direct consequences of an internal conflict, the map of which we are about to explore. Right now, you might feel like a pawn in a game whose rules you don't know. You are driven by sudden desires, unexplainable anxiety, or a paralyzing sense of duty. Your current state is like trying to balance on a beam. On one side, the force of desires pushes you, on the other, the force of duty. You spend all your energy just trying not to fall. By the end of this video, you will stop seeing yourself as a single, monolithic personality. You will understand that you are a battlefield for 3 powerful forces: an ancient beast of desires, a ruthless inner judge, and an exhausted CEO trying to keep the peace. We will give you a map of this battle. And with this map, you can transform from a pawn into a strategist, from a victim of inexplicable impulses to the architect of your inner life. This is the journey we will take together. Here is the map of our journey. In just 4 minutes, we will descend into the very basement of your psyche and meet the ancient beast within you, the source of all your wants. Around the 9-minute mark, we will find ourselves on the battlefield of your mind, and you will finally understand why you experience anxiety for seemingly no reason. And toward the end, in 20 minutes, we will arm you with a modern toolkit that allows you to hack this internal conflict and, for the first time, take conscious control of it. So, our first stop is in 4 minutes. Let's meet your inner beast. Look at a newborn. The most helpless creature on the planet acts like an absolute tyrant. It demands food, warmth, and attention immediately, tolerating not a second of delay. This is not just immaturity. It is a pure, unfiltered manifestation of the first and most ancient force of your psyche. Freud called it the it, or the id. Its only law is the pleasure principle. The id is a blind, bubbling cauldron of instincts, the source of all your energy. For it, there are no concepts of no, later, or you can't. Only I want and now. This force is like the seed of a plant. It contains all of life's power, but it is blind. It doesn't care if the surface is asphalt or fertile soil. Its sole purpose is to sprout immediately. But what force is capable of taming this primal chaos? Think about the last time you broke your diet for dessert or made an impulse purchase. The force that made you do it, completely ignoring common sense, is the id. It sees a shiny gadget, smells a cake, and demands them immediately. In its world, there are no budgets, calories, or tomorrows. There is only tension that needs to be released. The same blind mechanism underlies far more destructive phenomena: addictions, infidelity, fits of rage. They are all united by one phrase: I don't know what came over me. The id is not evil. It is simply blind like a nuclear reactor, a colossal source of energy without a control system. Freud noted that his chow chow Jofi helped patients reveal their most shameful impulses during sessions. And the first circuit of this control system was built from the voices of our parents. How can the energy to write a symphony or make a scientific discovery come from the same source as aggression or sexual desire? The answer lies in the psyche's most cunning mechanism: sublimation. The id provides raw, untamed energy. Then, other, more developed parts of the mind redirect it from forbidden channels into socially acceptable ones. Sports, career ambitions, creativity, all of human civilization from cathedrals to spaceships, is a product of skillfully redirecting the energy of our inner beast. Sublimation is like the work of a blacksmith. He takes a formless piece of red-hot metal, the id's energy, and forges it into a work of art. The goal is not to kill the beast, but to harness it. But who is this writer? And who wrote the rules about where it can go? The answer to the second question is the next great force, our inner judge. So we have discovered in the basement of our psyche a tireless and blind engine of desires, the source of all our passions and ambitions. But this force on its own is utterly destructive. It does not recognize reality, society, or consequences. A civilization built on the pure id would last no longer than 5 minutes. Therefore, to survive, our psyche created a powerful counterbalance, an internal warden whose voice constantly tells us what we should and must not do. And as we will soon see, this judge can be far more cruel than you can imagine. We are moving from a world where only I want exists to a world ruled by a ruthless I must. Remember our first paradox? Why do the most moral people suffer from the most severe guilt? The answer is the second great force of the psyche, the superego. This is not your innate moral compass. It is the internalized ghost of your parents, teachers, and society. Its job is to broadcast endless shoulds, musts, and must-nots. But it is not a wise judge. It is irrational and cruel. It punishes not only for actions, but for mere thoughts, for the desires generated by the id. 99% of the impulses born in the blind id are branded as unacceptable by the superego. The id and the superego are in a perpetual war, speaking different languages. But if these two are always at war, who negotiates and prevents a civil war in your head? Where does that nagging feeling that you're not good enough come from even when you achieve success? Why does any success seem insignificant and any mistake a catastrophe? The answer lies in the ego-ideal mechanism within the superego. Your inner critic constantly compares the real you to this idealized image. And the more you strive for this ideal, the louder the voice of criticism becomes. It's like trying to reach the horizon. The faster you run, the farther it recedes, creating a perpetual sense of failure. In the end, the id pulls you toward chaos, and the superego toward paralyzing perfectionism. How is it even possible to act when one force screams, "Go," and the other, "Don't you dare"? The key lies in the emergence of a third entity. You receive well-deserved praise, but instead of joy, you feel a cold thought inside. They're mistaken. I fooled them. Soon they'll find out. This is the work of the relentless critic. It takes your real achievement and compares it to an unrealistic ideal. Against this ideal, any success seems pathetic. Its weapons are not logic, but the most painful social emotions, shame and guilt. Shame attacks your identity. You are bad. Guilt attacks your actions. You did something bad. The psyche is caught in the crossfire. Someone is needed who can negotiate not only with these two tyrants, but also with the external world. This negotiator is the part of you that you are used to calling yourself, but its job is much harder than you think. So, at this point, we have met two warring superpowers within our psyche. On one side, the id, with its uncontrollable army of blind wants. On the other, the superego, with its total dictatorship of shoulds, which has created an iron curtain of rules and prohibitions. They are engaged in a continuous cold war in the territory of your soul, and any escalation threatens a complete collapse of the system. They cannot agree because they speak different languages, the language of instincts and the language of morality. But in this war, there is a CEO, a negotiator, whose sole job is to prevent mutual annihilation. And it is the most thankless job in the world. Now we will meet the protagonist of your inner life, your ego. How do you decide to eat the cake but only one piece and after dinner? If there is only a blind "I want" and a rigid "you can't" inside, who performs this balancing act? This is the work of the ego, which Freud described in 1923 in his work, The Ego and the Id. Its main tool is the reality principle. Its task is to find a way to satisfy the id's desire without provoking the wrath of the superego and without harming you in the real world. But the ego is not an all-powerful ruler. It has no energy of its own. It must borrow it from the id. The ego is a manager trying to operate a nuclear reactor using instructions written by a medieval inquisitor. Every decision you make is the result of painstaking negotiations. When one of these forces pushes too hard, the system starts to sound an alarm. Consider the choice. Go to a party or study for an exam. Your internal dialogue is the ego at work in real time. It weighs the risks. If I go to the party, the id will be happy now. But tomorrow, the superego will torment me with guilt, and reality will hit me with a failed exam. The compromise solution, I'll study for 2 hours, then go for a little while, is not a victory, but a fragile truce. The id is unhappy because it has to wait. The superego is unhappy because you are even thinking about entertainment. The ego is always caught in the middle. It's like the cone of a speaker. Behind it, a powerful magnet, the id, pushes. In front, the speaker's frame, the superego, restrains it. Its job is to vibrate between them, creating your behavior. Too much pressure, and the cone tears. This constant stress has a specific name: anxiety. Why can't an infant wait while an adult can? This isn't just growing up. It is the visible result of the birth and strengthening of the ego. A child cries, but food doesn't appear instantly. The child learns that to satisfy a desire, one must wait or take action. This moment is the birth of the reality principle. This completely changes the view on self-control. Willpower is not an abstract virtue. It is a metric of your ego's strength. In the first 2 years of life, the ego is practically non-existent. A strong ego can delay gratification. A weak ego easily succumbs to the pressure of, "I want it now." When the pressure becomes unbearable, the ego is on the verge of collapse. And that's when it sends out a distress signal we all know. So now we have a complete map of the players, the blind id, demanding "I want," the strict superego, dictating "you must," and the exhausted ego trying to find a compromise. Their eternal struggle, their alliances and conflicts constitute your inner life. Every decision you make and every emotion you feel is the result of their interaction. But what happens when negotiations reach a stalemate? When the ego realizes it might lose control? At that moment, the primary symptom of this internal conflict appears on the battlefield. The very feeling our timeline promised to explain. Anxiety. Now you will learn that your anxiety is not just nerves, but a signal of a specific threat within you. Why do you have a panic attack when there is no visible threat around you? This fear seems baseless, but Freud discovered that your ego signals not one but 3 different types of threats. The first is realistic anxiety, fear of a real danger, like a wild animal. The second is neurotic anxiety, your ego's fear that an uncontrollable impulse from the id will break free and lead to punishment. And the third is moral anxiety, the fear of punishment from the superego, which you experience as guilt. Your baseless anxiety is a fear not of the external world, but of internal forces. It is not a system malfunction, but its most crucial safety feature, like pain signaling bodily harm. But if anxiety is constant, how does the ego not go insane? It uses a secret weapon, invisible shields that distort reality to protect you, and you use them every day. Let's pause for a moment. This will take 15 seconds. Think back to the last time you felt intense anxiety. Now ask yourself one question. What exactly were you afraid of? Was it fear of something specific in the external world, like failing at work or health problems? That's realistic anxiety. Or were you afraid you would do something impulsive, inappropriate that you would regret? That's neurotic anxiety. Or were you afraid you had already done something wrong, that you would be judged, or that you had let someone down? That's moral anxiety or guilt. This simple exercise is the first step toward diagnosing your internal wars. Understanding the source of your fear is the key to overcoming it. Which of these 3 types of anxiety do you experience most often? Why, during a panic attack, are you absolutely convinced you are dying even though all medical indicators are normal? This is an extreme manifestation of neurotic anxiety. At that moment, your ego feels it is about to lose control over a powerful, forbidden impulse from the id, such as uncontrollable aggression. This internal threat seems so catastrophic that the ego generates a powerful signal of mortal danger to distract from it. A panic attack is not a weakness, but a desperate attempt by the ego to save the integrity of your personality. It's like a fire alarm that goes off not because of a fire, but because of the risk of a gas tank exploding in the basement. The danger is invisible but potentially more destructive. And the most common shield the ego uses to avoid this is the art of forgetting what is inconvenient to remember. Now we know anxiety is not the enemy. It is an indicator on your psyche's dashboard. It lights up to show that the pressure in the system is too high. But if the internal conflict is constant, why isn't this indicator on 24/7? Because your ego has learned to turn off that light. To do this, it uses a brilliant but dangerous strategy: self-deception. In psychoanalysis, this is called defense mechanisms. They were systemized by Sigmund's daughter, Anna Freud. This is the invisible armor your ego has forged to survive the war between the id and the superego. And now, we will look at how it works, using the most recognizable examples from your life. Let's start with the most essential shield, without which our psyche simply could not function. How can a person whose face is contorted with anger, fists clenched, sincerely scream, "I'm not angry"? Is he lying to us, or more frighteningly, to himself? This is the work of denial, the ego's most primitive shield. If reality, such as one's own anger, threatens to provoke guilt from the superego, the ego simply erases that piece of reality. But this is not a conscious choice. The ego does it automatically, milliseconds before the conscious mind can register anything. It's not a strategy, it's a reflex. Denial is like a child who closes their eyes to hide. But what if, instead of just denying your impulse, you subtly hand it over to your opponent? Why are the most ardent crusaders against others' infidelity sometimes secret practitioners of that very vice? This is projection, a more cunning mechanism. The ego takes its unacceptable impulse from the id and, like a projector, displays the image onto another person. But this is a brilliant double game. First, the id's impulse gets an outlet. The person constantly talks about the forbidden topic. Second, the superego is pleased because consciously this impulse is condemned. Projection turns an internal war into an external one. It's like a film projector blaming the screen for the dust on its own lens. What quality in other people irritates you the most? Why does a disgruntled colleague smile to your face and then accidentally miss a deadline? For many, direct conflict is scarier than this slow game. This is the result of a whole complex of defenses. The id's impulse to express anger clashes with the superego's prohibition. Nice people don't get angry. The ego finds a compromise, express aggression indirectly so it can always be denied. But this compromise doesn't solve the problem, it preserves it, destroying trust. A short-term reduction in anxiety comes at the cost of long-term destruction in life. Defense mechanisms are like trying to contain steam in a boiling kettle by plugging cracks with your fingers. The unconscious is like water, it will always find a crack. And it most often breaks through when we relax our control. So, the ego is the tireless engineer of a fortress that protects us from anxiety. It uses different materials. Denial is the rough stone blocks. Projection is a system of distorting mirrors aimed outward. Passive aggression consists of hidden loopholes for firing from, but every fortress has vulnerabilities. The pressure from the id within and from reality without constantly creates cracks in this wall. The unconscious never stops trying to break into consciousness. We receive its reports every night and in every random mistake. The ego's fortress is not impregnable. Why do you say, "It is with great regret that I opened this meeting," when you meant to say, "with great pleasure"? This is the answer to our second paradox from the beginning. Freud called this parapraxis, a moment when the ego, your internal censor, momentarily loosens its grip and a repressed desire from the id breaks through. But this is not just a leak. It is a brilliant compromise. The slip of the tongue both reveals the true desire, satisfying the id, and immediately mask it as an awkward mistake, allowing the ego to save face. This is not a malfunction, but a finely tuned mechanism. Your mistakes are not trash, but encrypted messages. But if slips of the tongue are short messages, then every night your unconscious sends you a full-length film about its secret desires. Why are dreams so absurd? How does your rational brain at night produce this theater where all laws of physics are broken? Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. In sleep, the control of the ego and superego weakens, and the id gets a chance to fulfill its wishes. Therefore, every dream is a wish fulfillment. But why then are there so many nightmares? Because the superego's censorship does not disappear completely. It distorts, condenses, and displaces images, turning the latent content of the dream, the wish, into the manifest content, the strange puzzle you remember. A dream is not a direct message, but a cipher. To understand how decryption works, let's look into Freud's own office. Even the most nonsensical dream has an iron logic. On the evening of July 23, 1895, Freud had a dream that became the cornerstone of psychoanalysis. He sees his patient, Irma, examines her throat, sees frightening scabs, and his colleagues make absurd diagnoses. At first glance, it's chaos and anxiety, but analysis revealed that behind the anxiety was a wish. Irma was a symbol for other women. The injection was a reminder of another doctor's mistake. The colleagues' absurd diagnoses were a way to shift blame. The id's hidden wish was to absolve Freud of guilt for a less than successful treatment. The dream was saying, "It's not your fault." This means that slips of the tongue, forgotten names, and dreams are not system glitches. They are valuable data that your inner beast sends to the surface. Freud was the first to treat this psychological garbage as treasure, as secret dispatches from the battlefield. He didn't just point out these leaks, he created a method for deciphering them, psychoanalysis. The central idea itself, to make the unconscious conscious, became the foundation for all modern depth psychotherapy. Until now, we have been passive observers. In the next climactic section, we will move from observation to action. How can a simple conversation with a stranger once a week lead to real, measurable changes in the structure of your brain? Freud formulated the goal of this process as where it was, there ego shall be. Psychotherapy is the creation of a safe alliance in which your ego, supported by the therapist, gains the strength and permission to examine the demands of the id and the prohibitions of the superego. Freud noticed that his chow chow Jofi, lying calmly nearby, helped patients lower their censorship. The therapist today is that very safe dog, creating a space where the ego's defenses can be lowered. Only here can the ego fearlessly face its beast and its critic. This is not a cure, but a training ground for the ego. But how do century-old ideas work in modern methods? Freud is constantly criticized for being unscientific, but that is precisely why his ideas permeate our entire culture. His direct descendants, psychodynamic therapies, openly use his model. But here's a twist, even his main opponent, cognitive behavioral therapy, stands on his shoulders. When CBT works with automatic thoughts, it's modern language for describing the ID's impulses. When it analyzes core beliefs and should statements, it's the language for describing the superego's directives. The names change, but the fundamental task remains to strengthen your rational part, the ego, so it can cope with irrational forces. There is a simple first step you can take right now. What is the very first practical step to strengthening the ego? Learn to recognize the inner voices. When you feel an irrational desire, tell yourself, "This is my id speaking." When you hear self-flagellation, say, "My superego has switched on." The moment you name an impulse, you stop identifying with it. You move from "I want this" to "I am observing a desire within myself." This pause is the space of freedom where your ego operates. You transform from a soldier scrambling on the battlefield to a general looking at a map from a hilltop. And from this position, you can make strategic decisions. The key to managing your inner world is not a war of annihilation. Trying to kill the id is to deprive yourself of all life energy. Trying to destroy the superego is the path to sociopathy. The goal is to strengthen the ego. A strong ego is not a dictator, but a wise negotiator. It hears the demands of the desires department, the ID, and takes into account the strict legal department, the superego, but makes the final decision by looking at the real world. This is not a life without conflict. It is a life in which you, not your impulses or fears, are in the driver's seat. In the final section, we will assemble all the pieces into a single metaphor that will forever change the way you see yourself. Your psyche is an ancient chariot. Harnessed to it is a wild, primal horse. This is your id. It is full of untamable energy, the source of all your wants. It doesn't distinguish between roads, it just lunges forward toward any pleasure on the horizon: food, sex, power, comfort. Without it, the chariot would never move. It is all your life force, your passion, your libido. To try to kill this horse is to completely deprive yourself of fuel for life. But if you let go of its reins, it will carry you straight into an abyss. That is why a second, balancing force is needed. Harnessed beside it stands a second horse, your superego. It is the complete opposite of the first. Proud, strict, trained to perfection, knowing all the rules and norms. This is your moral critic. Its job is to constantly rein in the wild horse, to condemn it for every wrong step, for every incorrect thought. Without this horse, you would crash into the first wall of social prohibitions. It protects you from chaos. But if you give it free rein, the chariot will not move at all. It will freeze, paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake and drowning in agonizing guilt. So we have one horse lunging forward and another pulling back. Who then drives this contradictory team? You are standing on the chariot, the charioteer holding the reins. This is your ego. And your task is the most difficult of all. You cannot simply choose one horse. You need them both. Your strength lies in your ability to manage them. Psychological health is not when one horse has defeated the other. It is when the charioteer, the ego, is strong and wise enough to use the untamed energy of the wild horse, the id, but directed according to the rules known by the strict horse, the superego. And most importantly, in accordance with the actual road that lies before you, you are not one person. You are a team of three. Now that you see the whole team assembled, which of these two forces, untamed energy or strict rules, creates more problems in the modern world? Now that you understand this internal struggle, what do you think is the bigger problem for the modern person? The untamed desires of our inner beast, or the crushing guilt from our inner critic? Write just one word in the comments: id or superego. This isn't just a comment, it's your vote in our small study. Let's see which of these two great forces gives us the most trouble today. Your answer is the first step toward understanding which of your horse's reins you need to pull tighter and which you need to loosen a bit.